So energy transfer between trophic levels is typically only 10% efficient. Now, the amount of chemical energy in consumers' food that is converted to their own new biomass during a given period is called the secondary production of the ecosystem. Consider the transfer of organic matter from primary producers to herbivores, the primary consumers. In most ecosystems, herbivores eat only a small fraction of plant material produced. Globally, they consume only about 1/6 of total plant production. Moreover, they cannot digest all the plant material that they do eat, as anyone who has walked through a field where cattle have been grazing will attest. Most of an ecosystem's production is eventually consumed by detritivores. Now let's look at the process of energy transfer more closely. So let's look at secondary production in a caterpillar. When a caterpillar feeds on a leaf, only 33 joules out of 200 joules, or 1/6 of the potential energy in the leaf, is used for secondary production or growth. The caterpillar stores some of the remaining energy in organic compounds that will be used for cellular respiration and passes the rest in its feces. The energy in the feces remains in the ecosystem temporarily, while most of it is lost as heat after the feces are consumed by detritivores. The energy used for caterpillar's respiration is only eventually lost from the ecosystem as heat. Only the chemical energy stored by herbivores as biomass through growth or the production of offspring is available as food to secondary consumers. We can measure the efficiency of animals as energy transformers using the following equation. Production efficiency equals net secondary production times 100% divided by a simulation of primary production. Net secondary production is the energy stored in biomass represented by growth and reproduction. A simulation consists of the total amount of energy an organism has consumed and used for growth, reproduction, and respiration. Production efficiency is the percentage of energy stored in a simulated food that is used for growth and reproduction, not respiration. So let's have a look at trophic efficiency and ecological pyramids. Trophic efficiency is the percentage of production transferred from one trophic level to the next. Trophic efficiencies must always be less than the production efficiencies because they take into account not only the energy lost through respiration and contained in feces, but also the energy in organic material in a low trophic level that is not consumed by the next trophic level. Trophic efficiencies range from roughly 5 to 20% in different ecosystems, but on average are only about 10%. In other words, 90% of the energy available at one trophic level typically is not transferred to the next. This loss is multiplied over the length of a food chain. If 10% of available energy is transferred from primary producers to primary consumers, such as caterpillars, and 10% of that energy is transferred to secondary consumers, such as carnivores, then only 1% of the net primary production is available to secondary consumers. The progressive loss of energy along a food chain limits the abundance of top-level carnivores that an ecosystem can support. Only about 0.1% of the chemical energy fixed by photosynthesis can flow all the way through a food web to a tertiary consumer, such as a snake or a shark. The loss of energy with each transfer in a food chain can be represented by an energy pyramid, such as the one on the left-hand side of the screen, in which the net productions of different trophic levels are arranged in tiers. The width of each tier is proportional to the net production, expressed in joules, of each trophic level. The highest level, which represents top-level predators, contains relatively few individuals. The small population size of top predators is one reason they tend to be vulnerable to extinction. The consequences of low trophic efficiencies can be represented as a biomass pyramid, such as the one on the right-hand side of the screen, in which each tier represents the total dry mass of all organisms in one trophic level. Most biomass pyramids narrow sharply from primary producers at the base to top-level carnivores at the apex because energy transfers between trophic levels are so inefficient. Now, certain aquatic ecosystems, however, have inverted biomass pyramids, such as the one on the bottom right of the screen. Such inverted biomass pyramids do occur because the producers, usually phytoplankton, grow, reproduce, and are consumed so quickly by the zooplankton that their total biomass remains at comparatively low levels. However, because the phytoplankton continually replace their biomass at such a rapid rate, they can support a biomass of zooplankton bigger than their own biomass. So let's look at biological and geochemical process cycle nutrients and water in ecosystems. Decomposition and nutrient cycling rates. Well, decomposers are heterotrophs that get their energy from detritus. Their growth is controlled by the same factors that limit primary production in ecosystems, including temperature, moisture, and nutrient availability. Decomposers usually grow faster and decompose material more quickly in warmer ecosystems. So how does temperature affect litter decomposition in an ecosystem? To find out, researchers with the Canadian Forest Service placed 21 identical samples of organic material, litter, on the ground in 21 sites across Canada. 3 years later, they returned to see how much of each sample had decomposed. The results of their investigation are shown on the right-hand side of the screen. It is clear that the mass of the litter in the warmest ecosystem decreased 4 times faster than in the coldest ecosystem. The researchers concluded that the decomposition rate increases with temperature across much of Canada. Decomposition on land is also slower when conditions are either too dry for decomposers to thrive or too wet to supply them with enough oxygen. Ecosystems that are cold and wet, such as peatlands, store large amounts of organic matter. Decomposers grow poorly there, and net primary production greatly exceeds the rate of decomposition. Nutrient cycles involve both biotic and abiotic components. They are called biogeochemical cycles. There are 2 general scales of biogeochemical cycles, global and local. Gaseous forms of carbon, oxygen, sulfur and nitrogen occur in the atmosphere, and cycles of these elements are essentially global. For example, some of the carbon and oxygen atoms a plant acquires from the air as CO2 may have been released into the atmosphere by the respiration of an organism in a distant locale. Other elements, including phosphorus, potassium and calcium, are too heavy to occur as gases at Earth's surface, although they are transported in dust. In terrestrial ecosystems, these elements cycle more locally, absorbed from the soil by plant roots, and eventually return to the soil by decomposers. In aquatic systems, however, they cycle more broadly as dissolved forms carried in currents. So what does a biochemical cycle look like? So on the left-hand side of the slide there is a biogeochemical cycle. A biogeochemical cycle summarizes the movements of a chemical element between living and non-living components of the biosphere. The nutrients in living organisms and detritus, reservoir A, are available to other organisms when consumers feed and when detritivores consume non-living organic matter. The low pH and low oxygen levels found in the waterlogged sediments of swamps can inhibit decomposition, leading to the formation of peat. When this occurs, organic materials from dead organisms can be transferred from reservoir A to reservoir B. Eventually, peat may be converted to fossil fuels such as coal or oil. Organic materials that are dissolved in water or present in soil or air, reservoirs C, are available for use. Although most organisms cannot directly tap into the inorganic elements tied up in the rocks, reservoir D, these nutrients may slowly become available through weathering and erosion. So in the next couple of slides we'll examine very closely the major reservoirs of water, carbon, nitrogen and phosphorus and the processes that drive each cycle. The widths of the arrows in each slide approximately reflect the relative contribution of each process to the movement of water or nutrient in the biosphere. So let's start with the water cycle. Biological importance. Water is essential to all organisms and its availability influences the rate of ecosystem processes, particularly primary production and decomposition in terrestrial ecosystems. Forms available to life. All organisms are capable of exchanging water directly with the environment. Liquid water is the primary physical phase in which water is used, though some organisms can harvest water vapor. Freezing of soil water can limit water availability to terrestrial plants. Reservoirs. The ocean contains 97% of the water in the biosphere. Approximately 2% is bound in glaciers and polar ice caps, and the remaining 1% is in lakes, rivers and groundwater, with a negligible amount in the atmosphere. Key processes. The main processes driving the water cycle are evaporation of liquid water by solar energy, condensation of water vapor into clouds, and precipitation. Transpiration by terrestrial plants also moves large volumes of water into the atmosphere. Surface and groundwater flow